Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails podcast. We're going to be talking today about securing your Magento site. And while we've covered pieces of that topic in previous episodes, I've got Victor from Sucuri with me today, and we're going to be diving in on some general best practices and things that you can do to help protect your site, whether you're on Magento 1, you're on Magento 2, whether perhaps you're going to be on Magento 1 for a while after Magento 1's official end of life. Certainly keeping your site up, running, safe, secure is always tantamount to your success and to your brand. And so with no further ado, Victor, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure thing. So as Robert mentioned, I am part of Sucuri website security. I function in a senior account executive role for the brand. My goal is typically to work with other agencies and managed providers to identify the best security solution that fits the need. I've been with the company now for about 5 years, and I've certainly seen my wide array of cases and I would say urgent situations when it comes to these types of compromises. So yeah, I'm really willing to make sure that anyone listening is properly armed to know what steps need to be taken, either proactively or reactively.
And I suppose that's a big part of understanding security for any publicly facing website, is that there's proactive and reactive that work together in a proper scenario, that it's not all about one or the other, which I'm going to shift over to one of my favorite questions that I always try to remember to ask different tech companies.
Sure.
And can you tell us a little bit about how the company got its name?
Yes. Okay. So the main context for it is one of our co-founders is Brazilian, Daniel Cid, and was our CTO upon founding. Sucuri is actually the Brazilian Portuguese word for anaconda. So it had a reputation, of course, for being one of the largest snakes and that dominated its habitat in the Amazon, which kind of aligned with trying to be a dominant security force for your site. But also the name given to a Brazilian tank destroyer for the military in Brazil in about the 80s or so. I believe the exact phrasing, which is found on some of our swag items, is the EE-18 Sucuri tank. Daniel Cid's family had a long line of military personnel that has history, so there's some duality in the meaning as well. Yeah. A lot of people presumed it was because it rhymed with security. Total happenstance, not the intention at all, but we understand now several years later how that ended up being the common connection, but it's actually completely based off of some Brazilian context.
Yeah, and it's funny, often when I ask the question, I've never, gotten an answer to it before, and I have no idea. In the case of your company, I've been a Sucuri user for years and years and years, predating my time with JetRails. And, and for those that are listening to the audio only version, you'll just have to believe that the piece of swag that I'm holding up is a pretty awesome tank.
and modeled after the tank. I actually, we have a company shirt that actually also detailed the tank and had the proper E18 designation on it. So the tank became also our own type of cultural item, so to speak. And it's funny you say that some people often don't know the history of the name. A lot of also what prompted the initial history of the company is that there were just a lot of close-knit relationships that were employee-based. So meaning, we only trusted so many people to join the company, of course, security focused and whatnot. And because of that, there's kind of a very tight-knit culture that I believe has remained after so many years, despite how large the company's grown. But so you could not escape knowing the history of whom you were working with or how you were connected in some way. So definitely, culturally, it's been really a fun experience.
Very cool. And look, I've heard of snakes on a plane, so I guess snakes in a tank we're gonna have to create some new swag for you guys and get an anaconda with a helmet sticking out of the tank. Yeah, this is why they don't let me make the swag for JetRails, because who knows what we'd wind up with,
That's
Jets,
right.
Rails. So understanding that the team has years of background with web security,
Yeah.
what types of security does the company provide today? What are the mainstays that your team is known for and bringing to market?
Sure. We're actually built on three main pillars. So the first is detection, being able to monitor your website to essentially detect existing issues. Most times they're malware related, right? So you'd want to be notified about an existing infection or some type of spam that's permeated throughout your SQL databases and whatnot. But in addition, also just general issues that may be produced through the site. So you may have a sysadmin that gets notified that the DNS zone has changed. Some records have been modified when they didn't authorize such a thing. So that's kind of curious. Other things may also result in downtime. So availability through your hosting provider, that becomes an indication. And sometimes there are many organizations we work with that don't even have that type of baseline visibility to the availability of their site. Which you would think, we want to know when the site's up or down. Well, not many are, put in a position to know when. The second component then became, and this is actually a progression of the history of our company. Great, we've identified a problem. What do we do? Well, we have an incident response team that is available to essentially clean up the site. So if there is an issue, the group is around to, provided we have all the access necessary, go in, remove malware. If you're blacklisted, get that domain off of those lists, Google, Norton prominently and whatnot. So that, we basically are reacting to the issue.
Yeah, users just get to the website and they're seeing, let's say in their Google Chrome browser, I'll call it the red screen of death. They're seeing some
Yes.
ugly warning saying, are you sure you want to proceed? This site doesn't appear to be safe. That's one quick way to lose a lot of customers, not just in the instant, but a lot of trust issues with brands, especially if you're running an e-commerce store or something where that trust is just crucial to your overall longevity and lifetime customer value.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes these things are not even as clear. It's very easy to see when you do face the red screen of death, which is also what I call it. But sometimes you may also get redirected to another site, some very fake looking Facebook login page, despite the fact that, you don't use Facebook. So those things often indicate, ooh, something's wrong with this site. And those are more obvious cases. But other more disguised mechanisms of infections or compromises also very prominent, I think, with Magento instances, become credit card stealers. You're going through the site as is, and the site's presenting itself as you expect it, but then you start submitting your personal information or your credit card information through a form that's there, and if it's not properly secured or locked down, then you've likely got some type of a CC stealer, as we categorize them, where then that information is getting extracted to some other attacker elsewhere, and then you would know as the buyer or the purchaser, and all of a sudden you're making purchases, you're not receiving the product, you're blaming the site, and in reality it's just someone completely hijacked your information, took it, and and never reached the company who was the storefront on that site. So that happens, and so those types of situations are especially critical because, again, that leads to brand reputation. Man, how can this store allow my credit card information to get stolen? A lot of people often, swear off companies, when their data breaches get announced, Target and,
Home Depot. And I mean, there's no shortage of them now. Wawa, the chain of gas stations and convenience stores recently. And often these, especially larger companies, bounce back and ones that have these physical brick and mortar footprints where you're going to wind up back at the store at some point, and maybe there's some consumer forgiveness, but not all companies can weather that storm and get to that point. Certainly online only businesses or online first businesses are really at high risk because that trust online is a huge issue, and consumers are already torn between where to buy give or take 50% of e-commerce is happening on Amazon. So you're just giving a shopper a reason to say, I'm not going to buy direct from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another component of this that gets, I think you alluded to a little bit, is not just the ability to weather the storm, but especially as a startup business, it becomes increasingly difficult then when your reviews are put out there initially because you didn't take those initial steps before going live and, getting your name out there, where all of a sudden it takes one bad incident. It takes one bad review sometimes. There are people who question whether or not they should buy from you or elsewhere. And Amazon, I think, is a great example, right? Because people, I know I do, I'll default to Amazon for a lot of purchases. I'll often try to do, let's say if I was trying to get some DIY project done, those are very customized, great. I can go to a small virtual mom and pop shop. But if all of a sudden I'm seeing really strange behavior, I'm not seeing a padlock on the site, and these types of things that kind of lead me to question whether I should finalize this purchase with them, I will likely hesitate and not do it. It's little things like that, and I think people are becoming more conscious of that. I think the data sensitivity of all of these compromises, especially as they're more prevalent, make it so. And I mean, I have friends and family who often openly ask each other in our chat rooms, "Hey, should I buy from here? Do we go here? What do you think?" People are asking more questions, which is good. It's great.
Yeah, it's good, but I'd say that at the same time, a world in which consumers can't trust buying from small businesses or even medium businesses is a pretty scary one. Where, imagine if that was in the physical world, that you were afraid to shop in a local plaza because you didn't know if they'd be stealing from your account, or if there were thieves just. So it's kind of like credit card skimmers at the gas station, and some people really want to avoid using their card at the pump as a result because they've just gotten better at that. It's definitely an interesting time for merchants of any sort in terms of accepting payments. And I don't know about your team, but given that in the United States that now retailers are more so using the chips in cards, it has, from what we've seen, created an uptick in thieves trying to use stolen credit cards online, where those chips are irrelevant, and they can just use the credit card numbers that have been stolen. So different things going on. Sort of, I guess, different angles to what kind of abuse is coming at the site. Whether it's hackers trying to break in and steal the traffic, hackers and get it somewhere where they can do something nefarious. Or maybe just, trying to get traffic to some other site where they might try to inject malware into your computer. Or the number of attack vectors and reasons has only grown, and I don't think that's just about commerce. It's a little bit of the Wild West still, even though the internet's been around for so long. I guess when you want to create something open that anybody can log in and access, that openness can lead to some challenges. But, I guess from our perspective as a web host, we see that a majority of users are on a popular content management system, whether it be WordPress or Drupal or Craft CMS or some other front end management system for an informational, lead generating, corporate news, magazine, blog, whatever sort of site, or e-commerce sites. Your Magentos and PrestaShops and Xcarts and
Yep.
I could keep going and going with all these modern platforms that have continued to evolve, but that those become to some extent targeted because there's enough users out there for hackers to look for holes, and it might be more effective for their time. It's kind of like learning how to pick a certain lock or crack a certain safe. That once you figure that out, if the business hasn't upgraded that particular lock or safe, well, you can just take advantage of it. That's sort of the regular role. So how does your team look at that? Would you say a majority of your users are on a popular content management system like that, or do you run into a lot of custom users? And what's the difference in terms of being able to keep them secure?
Sure. I think from a platform point of view, I think we often align with what ends up being the most popular platforms in general, right? WordPress being the most popular. I think Magento ends up being one of our most popular e-commerce platforms that we support as well. But one of the other things that we often also see is with that popularity, people often equate, well, there have been more compromises with a specific platform, but that often is paralleled with, well, the more popular the platform becomes, the more they become targeted, right? It's not to say Magento or WordPress or any of these others out there are more or less secure. To me, actually, that often ends up being the responsibility of the webmaster to ensure that no matter what technology you're built on, you have refined your defaults and put in the proper controls to ensure that your website and your store and everything is both working as expected and be properly, secured by minimizing those risks. I mean, I think a lot of what ends up happening, and we actually put out a report to sum up our 2019 year where we basically compiled all of the websites that we cleaned, which gives us really good indication about trends and whatnot. And specific to Magento sites, 20% of those sites that we cleaned included a credit card skimmer, which is an indication of seeing that become more prevalent. In fact, a lot of our blog posts over the last 6 to 9 months have actually continued to indicate this. And not just Magento. I mean, other platforms as well have had skimmers involved. And so this is becoming something that we're seeing with growth. There are client-side and server-side credit card stealers that we're continuing to remove on a yearly basis. So it's sometimes an indication that, hey, look, no matter what the platform you're using, it's not so much about what you're using, it's what's out there being used as a technique or tactic. Mm-hmm. And so how do we ensure that your site, no matter what it is, protects against that? And when especially as a storefront, when you have to also abide by PCI compliances, you're accepting data. So now you've got GDPR and California's privacy laws and all that. I mean, there's a lot of checkboxes you need to mark off now these days. And in reality, a lot of those compliances, if you're doing your due diligence, will often help in protecting against stuff like this. We get surprised all the time how we encounter organizations that are often lost, don't know how to do these things. So, I think for us, it's not simply producing a means and a tool to help do this. I think it's also important to educate because often I think people just don't understand the scope of why and how, and then that ends up being just as important as well, should I be using this? I mean, you could use anything you want to build your site, but how can you properly strengthen that site to prevent these issues?
And I think from my experience on the agency side, I found that a lot of businesses, whether they were e-commerce or not, that they built the site, and as far as they were concerned, it should operate and everything should be good. And I don't want to say it was a throw caution to the wind issue, but you would tell them, hey, we recommend one of these web hosts because they have these extra layers. We recommend these additional services like Sucuri and Cloudflare and so forth that are going to add these extra layers of benefit to you. And it was, but the site works, right? Why am I going to spend more money? And most people don't own a house or a car and not have some kind of insurance. If this is a piece of your business, it stands to reason that it's worth providing some protection. And so I think that the first layer is usually just getting these businesses that don't necessarily have a chief security officer, just understanding that they do need to take a little bit of time to understand their basic security and to feel confident in it, not just to completely assume that everything is going to be the same forever, but to sit down occasionally and just do a quick review with the appropriate vendors that they're working with. And so that's sort of stage one, is accepting that you've got a role to play. I'd say that step two is and I guess a part of step one is understanding that these, hackers of different sorts, they don't really care what your website does in many cases. When they're trying to steal your traffic or, get people to download malware so that they can, somehow abuse these visitors that are heading to your website, they don't care how, if you get the most traffic or least traffic. They don't care if you sell socks or if you're, I don't know, a local ballet studio. It doesn't really affect them. That this is, in essence, it's anonymized to them. They're just seeking out, this is one that looks like it's, we can pick this lock. This one's going to be an easy one. It's automated, and at least to some extent. So getting that understanding, but then, back to proactive and reactive, that you can do things to protect your site. And then you should still be doing things to monitor in case something happens that you're not aware of, that something does sneak through. And, the term 0 day, in essence, something gets through that no one has seen before, or that's not documented yet, that there is no security patch for yet. This technology, most security patches exist because someone found a vulnerability. Well, if the hackers find it first, that's the nature of it. It's not necessarily that your web developers or anyone else did something specifically wrong. It's kind of like the old adage is about, it doesn't matter how well you build the wall, they'll figure out how to go under it or over it or through it, or you have to stay vigilant. It doesn't mean that you just walk away and don't have any security. So I guess you've got your wall, but then you still need alarms and, cameras and security guards on patrol. And so your team, I suppose, offers that more to the masses. How do you keep evolving that product as these new issues are found? What's the protocol there? Are there quarterly updates? Is it ongoing? What does that schematic look like for how you're continuing to keep up with the changing security trends?
I think actually, it's the phrasing you used about the attackers finding another way sometimes, and I think people often struggle with this. Well, how could they, or why would they? And I think people don't realize. Let's remove, let's say, the site component of this. I mean, actually, one of my favorite quotes, it wasn't intended for security in this sector, but it was actually from Batman Begins, and it was Commissioner Gordon at the very end of the film speaking to Batman about escalation of things, right? He's putting on this suit. So he starts talking about, well, if we as police start carrying semi-automatics, criminals start bringing automatics. And if we start wearing Kevlar, then they're going to start purchasing armor-piercing rounds. This mentality is the same in this website space. Yeah, you're not going to have, your website may not necessarily be very attracting for attackers in terms of like how much traffic you're getting or how many customers you actually have. But the reality is a lot of these people are, they just like to terrorize. And so like, no matter what site, no matter whether you were this small store on the block, you're exposed. And that can be tempting to attackers just simply to say that they could do it and then they can't do it and they will do it. So how we defend against that. So we have a web application firewall where essentially what that is a layer on top of your site. And often, yes, I think it's very easy for us to sit and say, we can absolutely protect against what's known. Because like you mentioned, these security patches often are very detailed, include, proof of concepts that can, even for some security operations, implement their own server-side patches, which is fine. But the benefit with enlisting with a vendor, whether it's us or some others or another developer dedicated to security or whatnot, is that type of ongoing research that we can do, because a lot of how our internal workflow is, so we have sites that get submitted for cleanup, as I alluded to. And so we compile this data, and often if we can identify trends within a particular platform or a particular module or extension, then we can pass that to the research team to see, is that something we can add to our signature base? This signature base then can be something that can continue to strengthen our monitoring tools. So that's also something to help identify for our customer base. And then on top of that can be a new rule that we apply across our entire network. Sometimes we often do, of course, do some internal testing to see what else we can identify as potential vulnerabilities in a particular platform, and we help disclose some of them from time to time. The idea for us being that we just don't see, the purpose in putting all of that responsibility on the business owner, where we're, of course, knowledgeable in this field. We can allow for us to basically remove that responsibility off their plate so that they can essentially continue their expected role of running a business or running a team, and allow us to essentially say, well, as we're continuing to find new trends or techniques that can potentially introduce exploits, essentially we can continue to strengthen all of our rules and signature bases as we have over the years. Especially for Magento on sites, that's particularly important as, of course, the looming end of life date comes. One of the things I've actually had 2 conversations about that this morning, funny enough, is we're able to ensure that even as they're working toward moving over to Magento 2, but it's going to take them forever because they've made a lot of customizations to that platform, we're perfectly equipped and will be ready to basically continue to patch against any potential future Magento 1 exploits that may present themselves. As there, Magento and any other platform out there will continue to want to create those additional layers of Kevlar. Those armor-piercing rounds will continue to be developed on the other side of this battle, so to speak. And we'll be ready for that because we understand there's a responsibility for us to continue to empower the business owner to do what they wanted to do. No business owner signs up in reality thinking, I'm going to get really proficient at web application security. No, they sign up to make money, and that's what they should be doing. So I think to circle back actually on something you touched on, like what are the first steps you do? Take inventory of what you know. If you don't know how to do something that you have read everywhere, it's really important to do, and trust some vendor or some person, someone who is more proficient in this than you. Understanding your own weaknesses. I know that I'm not the best at, choosing clothing for my kids, or I'm not the best at cooking in the kitchen. I'm going to delegate that responsibility to someone I can trust to do that. In my world, it's my wife, and I trust her to make these decisions or to do these things that she's far more equipped to do than I. As a business owner, if I don't do web application security very well, I will entrust someone else to do that. And so I think that's, for us, a responsibility to make sure we continue to do that. So the firewall we have and the way we've developed this over the years should allow a very holistic approach on our part, so that we're always improving, self-improving even, without needing to rely on other alerts and updates and whatnot. I will say, though, having said that, I think if you're a business that's really invested, or an organization that's invested, at least getting added to Magento's security alert registry is a really good first step. It keeps you aware of certain situations. Maybe you don't fully understand it, but that could also be just an additional layer of visibility that you have, so you can go to your team, be like, hey guys, are we ready for this? Are we equipped for this? That type of...
even getting a new security patch installed and pushed out for a Magento store, when done properly, it's getting installed into a dev copy of the site. Often it's going to get pushed to a staging copy, and then finally pushed out live after various rounds of testing to see what that patch interacts with anywhere that it's causing anomalies or any grief, anything that it's breaking in essence or conflicting with. And so, and inevitably, if you've got sometimes dozens of extensions installed in your Magento site, custom theme, various other customizations and modules, and if things are being negatively impacted by some software update or patch, you've got to go and address it before you can really roll it out live. And so, you may be in the middle of other work. There may be other extenuating circumstances that often it takes weeks, and sometimes, unfortunately, with some sites, it can wind up into the months until it's brought up to date. That's part of why we believe in using a WAF, a virtual firewall, and some of these other tools. It's not that in our opinion, that it negates the value in properly patching and following other best practice, but you don't want to be sitting without this stuff. And that's why for us at JetRails, why we partner with companies like Sakuri and so many others, where we're both, blocking, I don't know, the Huns at the gate, right? The barbarians are at the gate. We're going to try to block that as much as we can, but we're also going to be there to, if anything does get through, to deal with damage control quickly and effectively. That usually, if you can catch some sort of an infection quickly, you can often catch it before major damage is done of any sort. Like the alarm going off as the perps break into the place. Cops get there 2 minutes later. Well, usually that's really minimized any theft or any other any other issue as much as you can. And so with that, that's why we provide a full stack. And I guess the benefit to a host like JetRails is that you're getting everything from one vendor. You've got one vendor managing your backups and your WAF and your CDN and your caching layer and your various, web nodes and servers and things, and optimizations for speed and scalability and things above and beyond security, so that as a business owner, as an e-commerce manager, whatever the title may be in a different organization that's overseeing this, that you're trying to manage resources well, that you're not necessarily trying to have 5 different vendors for this, that you're relying on someone to get the job done for you, to monitor and maintain and manage the entire hosting stack. But it's a fragmented world out there. So, I mean, personally, whether or not someone's a JetRails customer, I highly recommend that they look at getting a serious WAF and having other detection going on, server side scanning, seeing what's it's basically like running antivirus at that point. Who wants to be running a computer today without that? So why would your website not have it?
Well, and think about also not just your computer. I mean, we're at a point now where mobile phones end up being another vehicle for attackers to exploit. So I think so much time has been spent on like working off your desktop sites, but often the changes you make on your mobile site or mobile application are not always equivalent. So, there's just so many avenues that attackers take when they're primarily looking for, I think data is the largest commodity now. And I think it's fairly obvious. Yeah.
Google is not a search company anymore. They're a data company, the same with Amazon and many others. Yeah. I mean, certainly they have products where they have, tremendous revenue, but at the end of the day, data is what's allowing them to win as often as they do. Data is what's allowing them, let's say Amazon, to recommend products to you and to know when to reach out with what and how to organize what, the power of numbers. So I'm with you there. I'm going to shift for a second. We've talked a lot about what you can do, let's say, as a security add-on of one sort or another, an additional layer. What about general best practice? I'm sure that your team, let's say you finished cleaning up a site that's been infected, and if memory suits me correctly, your team is pretty good at reminding people about general best practice, that in essence, hey, don't go signing on to your website admin from an unsecure connection. Don't go using weak passwords and other things that are easy to crack.
Yeah, I think a lot of those end up being continuous educational pieces. We even get those passwords to, let's say, access their environment, right? To go in and review things. And I'll stare at some of these passwords like, we're really doing this today? Okay, great. We're doing a 4-digit PIN code for our password today. That's awesome.
Fantastic. That takes how many seconds to crack?
Yeah. There's actually, and what's crazy is it's actually really cool online resources for this that can help. I mean, of course, one thing I've always harped on is passwords, and it's really easy for us. I understand people are often overwhelmed, but they just don't know where to turn or what is even the right answer when it comes to passwords, because people say long and complex, but what does that even mean? To me, I think it really becomes easy when there's resources like LastPass. LastPass is a really intuitive tool I use on my browser, on my mobile phone. Allows me to store multiple complex passwords, which to me equates to using varying, like special characters and capitalizations and whatnot.
You mean, Victor, you're telling me that you don't use the same password for everything?
Of course. I don't even know how to respond there. Look, and to be honest, I mean, there was once a time that I did this, right? But then when one is informed, you realize how crazy it is. Mm-hmm. There's a site out there, howsecureismypassword.net. It's a really awesome tool. What that honestly is you'll go in there, you'll type in a potential password, a prospective password, and it'll actually tell you how long it would take a computer to crack your password. And they have some algorithms I'm sure they use, but that's actually going to be a really good key. I would encourage anyone who's not using some type of password manager now to go there, howsecureismypassword.net, and test this password you're probably using for about 10 different things and see how long it takes a computer to crack. If it's anything less than a day, you're probably in trouble at some point. You're asking for trouble anyway. So that's my first recommendation. And this, again, these are concepts that are just specific to securing your Magento site. These are things also you can apply in your real world situations.
Yeah, I've got a Google Chrome extension installed that warns me if I've got a username and password that are believed to already be compromised. So if I'm using something that may have already gotten out there in some data breach somewhere that I'm not aware of, because even if I know that there was a breach somewhere, do I remember that that I used that particular login set 5 years ago with that airline or something that I also used with another airline or something along those lines. So there are some tools. I always love when I see the username be something like admin. Is it yes, a strong password, but go with a strong username too. Why wouldn't you just
Absolutely.
Make it a little bit harder? I mean, at JetRails for Magento users, we put out a 2-factor authentication extension to help keep bad actors out of the Magento admin area. But for our users, we typically just lock that down by IP address so that random people can't be accessing your admin screen and trying to break in.
I think you should even consider the other side of that, where even internally minimizing the privileges you're allowing these roles you're creating, right? So like
least privileged access, absolutely.
So going in there, checking your role resources, seeing who's allowed to access what part of the instance. Not everyone needs full administrative access or permissions across the board. So being able to go in there and see who should be maybe a default subscriber versus administrator and stuff like that. I think those are just, or even being a super admin, I think those are things that as webmasters over these technologies really, really key, because you don't want to grant temporary, full administrative permissions to someone who only needs it for a day. If you forget to revoke it, and then that person may be disgruntled or upset later, and they remember they had this access. So, just little things like that, 2FA, I think is.
I've seen it with web plugin developers or extension developers that were being given usernames and passwords to log in, often, generated just for them, but not sometimes, website owners or, folks just give them direct main admin access or what have you. But nonetheless, whatever credentials they were getting, their ticket systems got compromised. They got hacked. Well, all those users that gave them credentials to try to install a plugin for them or debug a plugin or extension for them or whatever it may have been, now we're being compromised. That sometimes it's, just going through and doing a quick audit. Hey, who's got an account? What do they have access to and why? I'm with you 100%. It just makes sense. The same way that, a lot of folks, we see a lot of businesses that come to us that haven't been upkeeping their patches and software updates. But even if they haven't necessarily been keeping their extensions and plugins up to date, which can be just as bad. That in many cases, with some of these platforms, the attack vectors that we see used more often are not the main software. It's not WordPress or Magento. It's some plugin that's gotten compromised. So it's go and update those. And if you're not using it, I said on a recent episode of the podcast, if it's not bringing you joy, right? If it's not bringing you value, get rid of it. So, these are things that folks that tune in regularly with us, that they hear from time to time. But, it's basic stuff. It makes sense. It's logical. It's just about carving out a little bit of time to make sure that you're following best practice. It's setting yourself that reminder, whether you're going to do things monthly or quarterly or whatever cadence you set within your business. Occasionally updating passwords, that if you've been on Magento 1 for, 8 years and you're still using the same username and password, maybe it's time to update, right? It's just been out there too long in the world. Too many risks. I'm not saying that folks need to update their passwords every month. Although when you do use a system like LastPass, it's easier to do that because you don't have to remember it.
Yeah.
So I guess there is a lot of that out there in the world. The other interesting area we find in the hosting world, a lot of customers that we take over hosting for, not only have they not necessarily always upkept their content management system, their e-commerce platform, but their hosting environment. So software like PHP being outdated. By the numbers, I think a huge percentage of these websites are on servers that aren't being fully upkept, or at least their unique account isn't being fully upkept, sometimes because they're not updating their software to be compatible with new server software updates. So if your Magento site isn't up to date, you can't necessarily use an up-to-date version of PHP as an example. I'll keep picking on that one. Does your team run into issues where the server layer is circumspect because basically the users are just maybe they're paying more attention to their e-commerce system or content management system and less to the hosting environment?
So in that report we put together, we actually found that, so for context, and so everyone understands, PHP 7 is the standard right now, right? And PHP 5 and those variants reached its end of life. Yet there were still, of the sites we cleaned up in 2019, 54% of them were still using some version of PHP 5, which is...
Well, it's a majority, amazing. Literally. So
not
by too much, luckily, but still, that's tremendous.
So and that meant and beyond that, there were other versions. 7.1 is no longer supported. So in totality, we found that over 2/3 of the sites that we were cleaning were using a version of PHP that have reached end of life.
Wow.
And not receiving any updates, therefore vulnerable. So yes, you are completely spot on with the infrastructure as well being just as key to putting your your store, your sites in a position to succeed. Things like permissions in your directories. We've often encountered areas where you have core areas that have 777 permissions, therefore meaning you can do anything you want, whomever you are. You're not restricted in any way because it's basically a public directory for people to exploit. That's really poor measurement. So there's a lot of hardening recommendations we make. Restricting HT, making some modifications in your HT access to prevent things like image hot linking, which for those that are not familiar, meaning like you have images hosted on your site, someone being able to link to that to essentially continue to call on it to drain the resources on your server. So there's an example of something that's very benign in theory, but can cause damage, and then you're wondering why your resources are being consumed more than usual when it should be like next to nothing, let's say at 2 a.m. Eastern. Things like that. So yeah, I would totally echo.
We host on our own servers where it's pretty much a flat rate, but we also host on the public cloud, companies like AWS and DigitalOcean. And I think the challenge is, you're paying for resource, you're paying for bandwidth. That people don't realize sometimes by not deploying the right tools, by not blocking out the bad traffic, even if it's not being seen as like a DDoS attack that's taking down your site or physically slowing down your site, and you're not experiencing a true denial of service to your real users. It could still be costing you a lot of money.
No, people don't know, right? Like if the attacks are very, not necessarily small, but like it's just a very slow growth, there are going to be some webmasters that are even fooled who don't.
They see an uptick in traffic or something else that seems interesting to them. Sometimes they're excited by it.
Yeah, and if there's like a continuous baseline, right? So there was an episode of The Office, or those who have seen it, where one of the coworkers was bothering Dwight, and would just would like every day put like a nickel inside of his rotary phone thing, right? And so eventually he would add a nickel every few days, another one every few days. So the weight, you never really noticed it. And this isn't the same thing with your bandwidth. Like at some point, you just don't even realize it because for so long, it's just a baseline, even though something is obviously going on in there. If you knew what was going on there.
I never knew how Jim ever got to sell any paper. He just did such a great job taking care of Dwight in that office.
I am in the middle of season 3 as a total side note, and I can't believe I let it get this long that I hadn't seen it. But yeah, but that totally fascinated me. And so I was just like, well, of course, if you fooled someone into a fake baseline that's very consistent, you would never know it was anything but that. It's very obvious to anyone when they start seeing their traffic spike like quadruply and whatnot. Sure, that's very easy to suggest an anomaly, and then you start digging in. But if it's gradual, 1% more every day, 2% more, maybe that's just what you were hoping for. But perhaps that's just someone actually totally tapping into some of your resources that you never would have assumed otherwise.
Yeah. I've had conversations recently about all sorts of different bots, because a lot of website owners are very familiar with bots that try to fill spam into forms on your site, and it's just a nuisance. But you get, depending on your business type, people develop bots. If you're running some kind of a, free drawing or lottery or something on your site that they want to submit for that. And, they're going to build a bot to make as many submissions as they can without getting caught in order to rig the lottery. If you're selling items that, let's say, when they release some cool new sneaker, and, I was actually at a meetup that was talking about this recently, a Magento meetup in South Florida, where Philip Jackson was touching on this, that, you get this business that they're going to put out 1,000 of this unique sneaker. They've got a lot of value on the secondary market, that there are, major collectors and things, and, only 1,000 people are going to get to buy that sneaker. And so you get folks building bots that are going to try to, jump in the line as much as they can, buy up as much as they can, before it's all sold out. And, so there's,
right.
security, I mean, different things to different people, but you don't realize sometimes just how many opportunities there are for someone to try to beat the system, someone to try to scam your business or take some unfair advantage. It's a wild, wacky world out there. It's the same way that sometimes when they're trying to break into your site, they just want to send out spam emails, and they're looking for a clean IP address, a clean hosting account to do it from. They don't care about anything else about you or what you did, about your employees or your business or your customers, or they're just looking for a resource to abuse.
Of course, and I think because security, I think you're totally right, is relative to your business. It's relative to your needs. What kind of presence you're expecting to have, right? So depending on how large of an entity or a brand you are already, may require more granular and more robust feature sets or resources to be allocated towards something like this. And it's truly all relative. But I think to me, the biggest thing that I typically want to echo to whomever those webmasters are is simply, I would say first and foremost, always take inventory of what you have. And most compliance, SAQs and whatnot will always ask you this. But I think beyond that, just take inventory of everything. Know your knowledge, know the tool sets, know what options you have. Because if for business decisions or fiscal decisions, you choose not to certainly, let's say, go with the most robust WAF or security modules and whatnot, that's fine. But then at least take inventory of what hotline options will you have ready in the event that there is a crisis, and so that you know exactly whom to reach out to and when, and establish what ends up being then an approach internally within your business about, okay, great. If there was a crisis or an incident, I also know whom to communicate this to my team. And then that team can either inform maybe my client base, can inform other vendors that are dependent on things working on our end. So there's always going to have to be some kind of inventory check across the board. I really stress that because some people don't, and I ask them questions like this, and they're often like, I don't actually even know what my developer set up 2 years ago because they left and an opportunity was up for them, and they never set this up anywhere. That's common, and so I think most people need to kind of take some kind of annual inventory check of what they have or what they need to be doing. We try to educate on this with some of our blogs and guides about what you can do. Some, I think, not say entry level, but some very basic baseline checks of your things like your HD access and your hosting environment. Just to make sure. MageReport.com is actually also a really good free resource for those who don't use it. Yeah, and that's really it's actually, I think, really dense in the type of information they provide and highlighting things that are either of medium risk or very high risk. And so I encourage anyone who's running on a Magento site to go there. And if you're seeing failures and if you're seeing issues and risks that are there that you didn't before, but that probably should be an indication of trying to then set some time aside to just figure out how to put yourself in a position moving forward. So it may not be today. And maybe it hasn't been for the last 5-10 years, but security is not a static state. These things are always evolving, and one day there's going to be some type of mass compromise no one could have anticipated that you were not properly set up for. This happens a lot. With Drupal, it was infamously known as Drupal-geddon, so WordPress has had their share of major plugin vulnerabilities that impacted hundreds of thousands of sites, right? So.
No, there have been some recently, once again, absolutely.
Yeah.
At JetRails, if anybody checks out our security page, and I can drop a link in the show description, we'll actually go run a bunch of these tools as well as some proprietary checks and give you some feedback on security and loading speed optimization, no questions asked. There are times when somebody will come in for a deeper audit. But we'll just provide some of that cursory info. We love using the tools that are made available by teams like yours, Victor, and free resources like Mage Report. Information is power. So whether or not anybody's going to use JetRails as a service, we're happy to at least steer them in some good directions. And with that said, I think, it's also a matter of, I feel like every quarter I'm seeing a bigger volume of merchants that got sold on the cloud as this amazing thing. And it is in some ways, but too many of them are unmanaged. So they're getting spun up in AWS, Google's Cloud, Azure, wherever they're heading. They're not proactively addressing updates of their hosting layer, software like PHP. They don't have a good WAF running, and it's not if they do have something, it's not properly optimized, and no one's monitoring any of this. And so I find that that's the other side of the fence, is that it feels like perhaps every month I see an uptick in the number of merchants that we're in communication with that are almost that they've gone backwards, that they thought that they were getting something better out of the cloud, but they had a dev team just spin them up in something unmonitored, unmaintained, and unmanaged. And so they got the cloud, but it's not even really well deployed. Like with a Magento site, that's a beast. It takes a lot of caching. It takes a lot of best practice optimization. You see some folks that just spun up some EC2s at AWS, and and it's another one that's not well optimized. That's got poor performance. And it's certainly not properly secured. So I think that sometimes there are just new trends and challenges. Have you been seeing any other trends of that nature on your side? Anything that's up and coming so far in 2020 that we haven't touched on yet? I know we captured a lot of it.
I think credit card skimmers and stealers are chief among some of the things we've seen. We'll probably continue to see these types of things, especially against supply, a lot of reputable companies. I think web spam ends up being another next lucrative opportunity for bad attackers to generate their own revenue and traffic by diverting sites over, or utilizing some type of social engineering to push those types of attacks. And I think other trends we see, trying to think, malicious advertisements. I guess that kind of lends to that. So SEO spam is probably going to be one of those other things, and making sure that that's the other thing about open source is software developers will always continue to build new products and add new features. But a lot of these features often, I think people need to really challenge themselves to be diligent about how often is that particular product being updated, or when was the last time it was updated? How many downloads or uses has it had that can justify it being a sustainable product and not broken by design, right?
And in some cases, is it better to get that one-off thing because it's cheaper to do that, or is it better to get a SaaS add-on where there's someone, software as a service standing behind it, maintaining it and managing it? From the add-on perspective. So like in the Magento community, there's been a bunch of these now. Shipper HQ was one of the earlier ones that there was a team called Web Shop Apps that had written a lot of Magento shipping extensions. And they finally realized that they could package that up, keep it maintained, in a better situation by, charging an ongoing fee and, hosting some of it in the cloud and doing things a little bit more directly than just saying, here's this extension. We hope that as we put out patches that you install them, and we hope that you, not to say that their, let's say, Magento extension or something else might not need an update from time to time, but, that there is a best practice for being able to sustainably maintain some of this tech, sustainably, grow and rise to new challenges. I think that there's a lot of Magento 1 users today that are going to continue to experience that in the coming months as Magento 1 goes end of life. That a lot of those tools that they've relied on if they were still getting patches, from the extension developers and such, a lot of them will probably start to peter out. It's foreseeable. I know that some extension dev teams are going to continue to provide support. They've got a lot of users using these extensions.
Sure.
Not abandoning ship, but some have already abandoned ship. So it's sort of a mixed bag. And I do want to ask you, as a team, obviously, so you have user bases in, with these platforms like WordPress, Drupal, Magento. How do you interact with these communities? So, you're proactively monitoring sites and seeing, as you're cleaning up sites, seeing what types of attacks happened and trying to build new, I'll consider it like an antivirus definition around what you're finding so that you can more easily block or pick up on a future instance of that type of attack. But, what other interaction do you have outside of companies like JetRails that bring your products, your services forward to market?
I think, well, first and foremost, it's collaborating with those security teams upon discovering of some vulnerability that we don't see has been patched. That's always our responsibility on our part to report that, and that's been across any of those CMS platforms in the past. Now, beyond that, with the community itself, we've produced a lot of resources, especially over the last year, that speak to some do-it-yourself methods of either securing or cleaning your hack site. Often, I think we touched on, some people don't have the resources or the pockets to dive into and invest in a vendor, a service that we understand. The circumstances change are different everywhere, but we have guides and resources on our site that can help you identify trends and or anomalies that can lead you to where the infection sits and how to clean that. Best practices. I think if anybody were to Google security, Magento security, I think the first thing that should pop up is our security guide, which actually gives you steps to providing you like some strength best practices, right? Like obviously talking about updating your modules and extensions, going into other things like admin panel security, backups, some of the other things we've touched on throughout the course of this conversation. And moreover, always remaining committed to protecting any user of any platform through end of life. So, whether that's on WordPress, whether that's Drupal or Magento, whatever the platform is, committing to them that no matter how far in the future we are, we'll always be securing those applications. Will we always encourage you to update? Of course, but we understand that glove doesn't, fit every hand. So, we'll always be committed to making sure that we've empowered the business owner and the site owner to do the best, to be in the best position to succeed. But at the same time, I think it's always been our responsibility to educate as much as possible. I also do more educating than I do, onboarding and stuff like that. So I think it's really, I think it's important. I think you mentioned, knowledge is power. I think that's a great phrase to use. Knowledge is power, because the more you have of it, especially with something like this, I think the more confident and the less resistant the business, the site owner will be to looking for better tools and better, resources, or them being more confident to challenge their cloud provider. Well, great, your infrastructure is secure, but what are you actually doing specific for my web application? How secure are your processes? What resources do you have available for me if my site doesn't get infected? So I would challenge anyone listening, if you don't know the answer to that, even just with existing vendors you're using, start asking those questions and take inventory of what you have, and whether that may spark a conversation about changing what you're using for something that makes more sense. So.
Absolutely. At JetRails, we're really proud to help customers more holistically, so that, as I was mentioning earlier, they don't have to manage all of that on their own. That we're their outsourced sysops team. In essence, we're an extension of their business. We're partners in addressing these things, but that's not meant to be a one size fits all for every single user out there. We love educating the community, making sure that they've got the resources that they need, whether they're getting it from us or they're getting it somewhere else.
Sure.
And you mentioned something that I wanted to go one level deeper on. If I remember correctly from years ago, I recall your team finding security issues with Magento that were being reported to Magento and that were then being patched in future Magento security patch releases. In essence, your users were already virtually patched against those things.
Yes.
You'd already found them and addressed them. And then the Magento community would get that later on. And your team, was actively playing that role. Almost, I don't know that your team was getting any sort of bounty for it from Magento at the time, but but that's just part of what we all do in the community is, if we find some kind of major, or minor vulnerability that that we want to push that forward, before someone with less good intention finds it.
No, yeah, there have been some stored cross-site scripting years ago, and more popularly, we've gotten different variants of attacks that we've disclosed, and then just Magento for others. And it's never with the intent to collect a bounty or. In reality, a lot of what we do, I think, is just a responsibility in the security community in general. It's no different than disclosing even with other, security vendors about are you aware of this? And collaborating with them, because ultimately we're trying to serve the audience overall over the globe to be in a position to succeed. And of course, if of course we've identified this, then that means we'll be able to reproduce these things, and we're very immediately producing a patch on our end as well while we disclose this, because of course, these platforms need time to develop a patch, and
distribute it and give their users time to actually get it installed.
I mean, it's just like developers, there's a QA process involved to ensure it doesn't break anything else, right? But of course, in that window, what we call it, that 0-day window, that's often exactly where most attacks happen, because you have to disclose that there's an issue that draws the attention of black hat actors out there, and we often are fortunate enough that sometimes even our existing rules that have been sitting there for a long time prevent against that. I think towards some point last year, we were tracking these things, and we were catching at least 95% of 0 days as they were announced with our existing default rules. So it's very rare that we actually have to go in and create something new from something that was disclosed, and that's just, again, I think probably it's a good validation of the efforts our research team does every single day, and some of which whom I work with personally. So they do a great job, and we try to do the best in the community, because also we have people that are part of that community, and so they're just as invested in making sure the platform succeeds. So we have people who organize events and are part of that and lead all kinds of initiatives, which is great to see. But it's just as important to us.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining for this conversation today. Anything else coming down the pike that you want to chat about, or any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
So I think one of the things I just touched on was about making sure you take inventory of what you have. I'll echo it again. I'm not trying to, beat the same drum on this, but I'm never really surprised or worried when someone doesn't know exactly how to secure a site, or to understand the difference between an endpoint or a cloud-based firewall. These types of topics, they're important, sure, but a lot of times the problem is simply not knowing what you have in place. It's no different than when someone purchases a new home. Sometimes you're in a rush to move in and you're setting everything up, but then you don't take inventory of the fact that the sliding door has a really bad locking mechanism, and you got to get that replaced. And some people never notice that. And stuff like that can lead to someone just testing out every window, and then one night, boom, it's someone getting in and stealing furniture and equipment. So take inventory of what you have, what you know, whom you have delegated for these tasks, and start there. Online, there's so many resources, and whether it's reaching out through us or with you guys to guide them in the right direction. just at least them coming to the door with, hey, we just realized that we're completely vulnerable with A, B, and C. That is the best first step for any business owner. So I would challenge anyone who doesn't know for a fact exactly how all of this fits in within their existing, with their existing life and their operations, to go do that, and then let's get the answers together.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining. For our listeners, thank you for tuning in for another episode of the JetRails podcast. Please, by all means, feel free to subscribe, comment, and engage with us wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate all those ratings and all the feedback of all sorts that we've received. You can interact with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. We're posting videos of most of these episodes, full videos on Facebook and YouTube that you can see. And good luck for those that are about to run some security audits on their site. At the JetRails team, we're happy to help with some of those free audits, and hoping that yours turns out really good. And happy selling.